stand to unveil the plaque.
Maybe I should say before I start just to thank you for the honour of doing this. I'm glad none of my family are here because I'm noted in my house for having brown fingers, so I hope this tree will continue when I leave. Somebody asked me what was my connection with Thomas Ashe. Well, I'm a native of Dingle. I went to school with many of the descendants of Thomas Ashe. I came from the same parish as himself. Mind you, I'm not the only one to come from that same parish. Much closer to him, that few acres of land has produced a lot of important people, and within just literally a couple of 100 metres of his home was born and reared Paddy Moriarty, who died recently, who well known for his work with the ESB, Sister Stanislaus Kennedy, who has done huge work, and just as I was leaving home a while ago I heard Deputy Joe Higgins, who was also born just a couple of 100 yards away from it. So it's an interesting bit of land that has given a lot of different people. I'm also glad to do this because about 12 years ago, 1985, coming up to the anniversary of the birth of Thomas Ashe, this area, Lusk and Rolestown, I was teaching in Rolestown at the time. We had been doing a lot of work as teachers in our classrooms about Thomas Ashe and the 1916 Rising, and we felt that as local teachers we should honour him as a teacher. And at that time in 1985, many of the people here today were also there, and we commemorated his birth with the planting of an arbutus tree. An arbutus tree is also known for well known for its connections with Kerry. In Irish it's called Crown Canya, and in fact a place very close to Thomas Ashe in where he was born is called Ordnacanya. So that's all I want to say at this time. I'll maybe say a few more words when we get inside about Thomas Ashe. I'd like to thank everybody, and I can say from the people of Dingle who had a commemoration like this last some weeks back, that they were delighted to hear that there was something similar being done here by the local community, and I'd like to thank the local community and the councillors for their interest in it. And I will now attempt to plant the tree in a way that will not cause a difficulty in the future. And I just feel myself that there is nothing more appropriate to Thomas Ashe than the fact of putting something living there, because he himself had a great interest in the whole area of nature study. This is the agricultural vote next time round. Okay. The man I buy my trees for always says, don't put the clay too far up along the edge of it or it won't grow. So there. So yeah, but I don't think it should go up any higher because it won't. It'll I know that much. It'll stunt the growth of it. That's for sure. Thank you very much. And the next bit, yeah. But I think that's a very fitting and a beautiful stone, and I really would like to say to young people as well, and I'd say a few words inside about the importance of remembering people like this. It's usually the least of my difficulties. It's what I say usually causes the problem. Just to say again, thanks. I feel honoured to be asked to do this today, and I really am delighted at all sorts of levels that the people of Lusk have decided to take this on board and to set up that, or to establish the stone outside and the tree. It really is important for a whole lot of reasons, and I really like to say to young people in particular that, you know, when we look back in history, we wonder what's it all about. And I know I'd be the first to say that when I was growing up in Dingle, we thought it was more important that Thomas Ashe was related to Gregory Peck then I was a bit older before I figured out the real importance of his life. And I suppose I'm conscious then that people come to terms with things as they get older. But I myself, as Thomas Ashe, I'm General Secretary of the INTO, and Thomas Ashe's family were very involved in the INTO for many, many years. He himself was involved with our Dublin branch. He was a tremendous teacher and educator, and that's the first thing I want to say about him. He's not perhaps remembered as much about that as we would like. He was an extraordinary educator. He took an interest in children with special needs at a time when most people felt they should be kept at home. He was a person who was prize-winning, a teacher teaching in Lisbon, in his own area before he came up here. He was a person who introduced science to the curriculum. Now that's very interesting because you might have noticed a little piece of information which didn't exactly get front headlines during the course of this week. But what you knew as the Department of Education changed its name last Monday to the Department of Education and Science. And the reason it changed its name to the Department of Education and Science was the importance of science in curriculum and education. But long before it was popular to do, or long before people in authority were recommending it, Thomas Ashe in his school in Cardiff had introduced science to the curriculum. I think it's a small thing, but it gives you some idea of the kind of person he was. Similarly with nature study. We were out there today and we were wondering what kind of a tree was the lime tree that we put there. And I was a generation of people who were born in the late 40s, early 50s, and many of us didn't know the names of trees and plants and grasses and all that sort of thing. Until in 1972 and 3, we began to teach it again in schools. People like Thomas Ashe were teaching it at an extraordinary rate at a very, very early age. And not only that, but he also had the talent to draw the trees and to draw the plants and to draw the leaves and to show the changing seasons with his extraordinary talent for sketching and as an artist. And so I'm really trying to put those points to people, that people would remember him in that way. He taught the Irish language the time, and the people in charge of the Department of Education were utterly opposed to it. He felt it was part of our tradition, of our culture, part of what we were. And I think that's a hugely important thing that people would remember about him. I also want to say to people this. People like Thomas Ashe, who fought in a physical struggle, in an armed struggle in 1916, are not to be confused with any people who are out there today trying to undermine democracy. Thomas Ashe fought for democracy, fought to establish a state, to establish a nation. If he was around today, he'd be up there at the talks in the north, he'd be trying to negotiate peace, he'd be involved in the peace process. His work was for peace, for a peaceful Ireland where people understood their culture. He taught, held him in the highest regard, and the people of Lusk where he taught, and also in West Kerry where he taught, were people who held him in very, very high regard indeed. It is great to think that we would be commemorating him today here in the hall of the Gaelic Football Club. This is, of course, in Kerry we always talk about football, or our part of Kerry is in the GAA club, in the GAA club, and because he was so involved himself. And it's interesting, coming from West Kerry, like myself, and I hold the title of being the worst footballer who ever came out of West Kerry, the pupils that he taught, and he developed a certain skill in that area as well. So I would say that we are talking today about a man who would have felt that this, if we never put a tree outside, if we never put a plaque outside, that he would have felt that the building here and the club here was tribute enough for the work that he had given to the local community. And like all great teachers, as I always say, no teacher is a great teacher if they're not part of the community in which they're teaching. And he was certainly part of that. And that and the pipe band, that he was so committed to it, and that is also a fitting monument and tribute to him. Is there anything more important in a person's life? Is there any of us ever going to do something? And patriotism for him did not have much to do with physical violence. It had an awful lot more to do with our culture, with our heritage, with our language, with what we loved, and with what we were going to be in our place in the world. And above all else, he was a Democrat. His fight was for a democratic republic in this country. He is somebody who is a great role model in the way he's given us a sense of place. And the sense of place is important. He always said about the children that he taught, they are of Lusk, they're from Lusk, and they take pride in their place and teach them to have pride in their place. And there's nothing more that any teacher could do. So again, I'd like to pay tribute to the committee, and to the councillors, and to the band and the dancers, and also, of course, the commemorative committee. And the same to the people in Dingle and West Kerry, Lisbon in particular, who did something similar a month ago. It's my honour and my privilege to be invited here to speak today. Thank you very much indeed. Very much.
Thank you very much. The Lusk Heritage Group and the Round Towers Gaelic Hurling and Football Club thought it fitting that some focus should be brought to bear on the significance of this man in relation to the history of Lusk and indeed the national history. Thomas Ashe came to Lusk Parish as a teacher in 1908. He taught in Cuduff National School. At that time, Lusk was a very quiet place. The failure of successive national leaders through time had dulled the people. Back then in time, the village teacher had an inspiring role. Thomas Ashe was no exception. He had a passionate interest in the development of the Gaelic League and all Irish culture, and he got a ready response from the people. The formation of the Lusk Pipe Band, the founding of the GAA Club, the building of the Handball Alley, all testified to a new spirit in the area. Maureen McCarthy, Ní McCann, kindly presented the Heritage Group with an Irish dance instruction book from that period. This was one of the manuals used by Thomas Ashe and Matt McCann in the Lusk Carnegie Library, where adult classes were held in Gaelic language, Irish dancing, drama, poetry and music. In addition to the involvement of local activities, Thomas Ashe gave much time and energy to the formation of a national volunteer force which taught military routine and discipline to youth members in Fingal. The O'Rahilly, the Sean McDermott and Patrick Pearce were just some of the soulmates of Thomas Ashe in the dream of national independence. His tragic death provoked a national outrage. The cortege, which followed his remains to Glasnevin Cemetery, was the largest ever seen in Ireland. The Lusk Pipe Band headed the procession. Today we are proud to have 3 band members, Jamie Russell, Paddy Clare, Fintan Sherry, as part of the celebrations. Thank you.
Sergeant, ladies and gentlemen, it's indeed an honour and privilege for me to be standing here today to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the passing of one of Ireland's, I'd say, finest. But to give you a bit of a rundown on Thomas Ashe, I suppose, where will I start? Thomas, as you know, Kerry, attended Ardmore National School, passed successfully through the various classes. 1900 began his term as monitor, which ran for 5 years. To end in the 3rd year, he secured the Reid Prize, and at the end of the 5th year, repeated the success. The certificate, in evidence of which date the 7th of December 1905, is in view in Dingle Library. It can be seen there anytime. The Gaelic League attracted the most brilliant of minds, and of course Tom, like Pearce, was profoundly inspired by it. His Gaelic League work occupied his evenings and weekends. He took an active part in promoting the Dingle Feis and wrote a play on Huncon, the Yank, a comedy on the popular theme of the returning American, which he produced at the Ashe. A local professional man who was an Ireland supporter of the Gaelic League was so impressed by the play that he took the entire cast to Tralee, where they gave an open-air performance at the Tralee Feis. The setting was in the town park, where unusual lighting effects were providing a plentiful supply of torchlights. On the way to the park, Thomas, with the company of players, marched through the streets carrying the costumes and stage properties, led by Brian O'Donovan of Carberry playing the bagpipes. The crowd followed, airs and songs. So great was his interest in this branch of study that it is probable that he had given a normal span of life that Thomas Ashe might have attained the eminence in the field of P.W. Joyce or a Henry Hudson. Some of his favourite reading related to the achievements of great military leaders like Napoleon, and he studied the campaigns of the American Civil War with a special admiration for the exploits of Stonewall Jackson. He would speculate on the outcome of the encounter between Owen Roe and Neil Cromwell. His heart went out to those who fought heroically against desperate odds, and he had a particular affection for Peter O'Neill's Crowley, Michael Dwyer, Robert Emmett, Pierce McClure, and the greatest Irishman of all, Wolfe Tone. He entered Delascal Training School in Waterford in 1905 at the age of 20 to commence his 2-year course in the training as a national teacher. And shortly afterwards qualifying, he obtained the position of principal at Cardiff National School in Lusk, County Dublin. There he took up duty on the 16th of March 1908 and taught, except for a 6-month period in America, until 19th of April 1916, a period of 8 years. For Thomas Ashe, they were intense, creative, golden years. The pupils he taught at the school at Cardiff idolised him. He was a good teacher who was not cross-eyed, said one former pupil, and what better answer is there to a school child's prayer? He was the most outstanding teacher I ever met, recalls Thomas J. Brannigan. He had such a way of putting things that you took them and you absorbed them, and without any feeling of having them forced upon you. Mr. Ashe did not believe in using the rod. He was very much liked by his pupils. When he returned from America in 1914, the kids at the school went wild with delight, and he taught us all the Fenian Rebel songs. Another pupil recalls that amongst the distinguished visitors who called to see him at the school at various periods were Claude Chavas, Francis Bigger, Senor Wolfen, Roger Casement. The names are significant, for they link the various national interests in which Thomas was immersed. The fact brings us face to face with the primary purpose of Thomas Ashe's life. Initiative of the IRB. Early in 1914, Thomas went to America, returning in September with £1,000 collected for the volunteer courses. Following John Reynolds' Wooden Bridge compact route, centering mainly in Lusk and Swords, remained loyal to the original ideal of giving their service to Ireland and within their shores. Constant attention to drill and manoeuvres produced a thoroughly trained group of fighting men. They gave possibilities for military operations and worked out a detailed plan for the area, which we put on paper. They were submitted to Joseph Blunt at a meeting free, and the right of man found ready to claim. Tom was a loyal friend and supporter of Jim Larkin in the 1913 battle. And to Finn Gold, he brought the colour in mixed drama, painting global and national history, all commanded his attention, and in it was Thornton, who kept the house in head trim last time from her chin. Few people can have known Tom. In football on Good Friday, we will surely win, for we will have Brian Brew with us. He then put on the flowers in the blue or Lewis, Portland, and for a very, very brief period in Pentonville, before being released in the General Amnesty of 1917. Although he was released, the prisoner's first choice for nomination to the parliamentary vacancy that occurred in East Clare, he declined to stand. He enjoyed only 2 months of freedom before his rearrest on 18th of August, and in that brief period he crowded many events, including the only journey he was able to make home to Kennard and Dingle, the Clare election campaign in support of the Lyra. The Oireachtas Festival at Waterford, the Casement anniversary oration at Ardchurch, and a notable speech he made at this particular commemoration, and many other public appearances in support of the campaign for a republic. One of his speeches made at Ballinallee, County Longford, on the 25th of July led to the issue of his arrest. And for his arrest on the charge of inciting disaffection or whatever you like, seditious speaking. For weeks Thomas was compelled to go on the run from castle detectives, and he used mainly the safe refugee of Pat O'Connor's house in Donnybrook, into which that expert craftsman had built a concealed room. And on the evening of the 18th of August, having occasion to go into the city centre, he was recognised by 2 detectives near Nelson's Pillar and arrested. At his court-martial in the Lower Castle Yard on the 3rd of September, he was sentenced to 2 years hard labour with a remission of 1 year, a draconian sentence in the circumstances. The evidence against Tom was a defective by rule. It consisted of a confused mental recollection by 2 constables of what they alleged he said. Thomas's own opinion was that he would have gone free had he used a lawyer in his defence. In Mountjoy Jail, where he was confined, he found his friends Austin Stack and Finian Lynch, who had already been sentenced to hard labour, and some 40 other Sinn Féin prisoners, including Joe MacDonagh, brother of the executed 1916 leader. They were all placed by the prison authorities on the same level as common thieves or burglars, and given precisely identical treatment. This classification they refused to accept. And since 1848, it had been official British policy to degrade Irish political prisoners. The fierce personal protest of O'Donovan and Rossa was one of the steering chapters which marked the resentment. This chapter, which marked the resentment, the fierce personal protest of O'Donovan and Rossa forms one of the steering chapters which marks the resentment this kind of treatment aroused. And Thomas Ashe and his comrades made it clear that they were not particular what sort of treatment they received, so long as they were not classified as criminals.
Going hunger strike. Meanwhile, they declined to do any tasks allocated to criminals, such as sewing mail bags or homes. On September the 20th, the acting governor claimed that the prisoners mutinied when they were removed off his feet, boots, and for the next 50 hours he lay in his cell.
For about 5 minutes, and he asked Tom how he was, and he told him, "I was splendid this morning until I was forcibly fed. The forcible feeding upset me completely." Before they left, Thomas said to them, "We made a great fight." Father Augustine spoke to him in Irish the words of comfort that he had heard from time immemorial by the Gael-taught fireside. "God is good, he has given a good mother." Thomas replied, "Yes indeed, Father." Those were about his last words he uttered. He died at 10:30 p.m. that night, having received the last rites of the church from Father Morning. Thomas Ashe's remains were removed to the Pro-Cathedral. A solemn requiem mass was celebrated for the repose of his soul, and from there to City Hall to lie in state until he was taken finally to Glasnevin to be buried on the 30th of September 1917. His funeral provided an impressive demonstration of the affection and respect in which he was held throughout Ireland. People travelled to Dublin from all parts of the country to attend it. His Grace the Archbishop of Dublin, the Most Reverend Patrick Walsh, D.D., whose nationalistic views were well known, joined in the tribute by sending his motor car to the funeral. About 200 priests, ranging from the very young to the very old, and representing all parts of Ireland, walked immediately ahead of the hearse, a remarkable testimony to the deep religious faith and integrity of the dead patriot. Contemporary press reports said that the funeral was as great as Parnell's, or greater, and spoke of its military splendour and precision. The immense procession, which was marshalled by the Irish volunteers, was dignified, orderly and reverent. It was a tribute charged with deep emotion to a dead man. It set the seal of the nation's approval on the cause for which he stood and for which he had died. General Maxwell's deeds were well remembered anew, and the latest act of administration served by Maxwell's aroused the most robust feelings of protest and resistance. The young men of Ireland who came to Dublin to march behind the coffin and saw their strength and sensed the meaning of that hushed September afternoon returned to the remotest parts of Ireland with minds steeled by their experience. The death of Thomas Ashe was an overt and major act of hostility to the Irish Republican cause. The treatment which resulted in his death for the victor of Ashbourne produced a temper which hardened into the national resistance of 1919 to 1921, and signs of that hardening were clear enough in the challenge uttered by the leaders of the Republican Ireland. Speaking at City Hall on the night after the funeral, William Cosgrave said, "The last headline that he gave to the humanity was the basis of his lifetime. My Lord Mayor, if I die, it is in a good cause. The empire of his genius, his courage and his tenacity shall outlive the empire of wealth and power and despotism, which has deprived Ireland of one of its most valiant sons." The day of the funeral, Eamon de Valera addressed a great meeting in O'Connell Square in Ennis, in which words have been reported as follows. "Dreamers were they who asked them to be loyal to the Constitution which was responsible for Thomas Ashe's death. But he was asked them to be loyal to Ireland and to be true and honest to the flag that day was unfortunately draped for Tom Ashe. His death would tell the world the spirit that was left in Irishmen, and would tell the world that nothing but freedom would satisfy the Irish people, and that they were ready to perish one after the other rather than submit to be conquered. Most of all, the temper of young Ireland reflected and forecasting speech of classic pith and brevity delivered at his graveside by his friend Michael Collins. As the gunfire faded, Collins said that those shots were the only fitting tribute to a dying or a dead Fenian. Thomas Ashe, by the way, was the first man to die on hunger strike in this century for the cause of Irish freedom. And he was the first of a succession of young Irishmen to die, because it was 22 in all, up to 1981. And aspiration for United Ireland is still with us. And I think it will be carried on from wherever until finally it's achieved. So on the basis of that, I just want to thank you all for bearing with me on this.
Well, Lynch, thank you very much for that more than interesting speech. There's a wee girl here from Lispaul in the County Kerry called Marie Griffin, and she has something with her which was also produced in memory of Thomas Ashe, a celebration which they held a month ago. So Marie, could I ask you to come here to me for a minute and say a few words?
First of all, thank you for calling me wee. It's the first time in my life that I was ever called wee. I'm delighted to be here. I represent Krista Queenacon Thomas Ashe from Lispaul, County Kerry. And I'm not related to Thomas Ashe in any way, but I have one thing in common with him, and that is that when he qualified from De La Salle College in Waterford, his first position was actually in Menard Castle National School, and I also taught in the same school. Now, what I have to present to you today are copies of 2 songs that the words of which, and actually the music of which, we collected in 1991 as part of a school project. And I'm delighted that we actually did so, because one of the singers is actually no longer with us. And I know of no other person who actually has these songs. So it is my privilege to actually just present them to the Lusk Heritage Group. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Marie. It's great that we can cooperate the two ends of Thomas Ashe's life, Thomas Ashe's home and his adopted county. Now I'm going to call on our own Paddy Weston, who's going to describe to us in graphic detail, the Battle of Ashbourne, which was Thomas Ashe's main claim to military fame. Paddy.
I won't delay you for much longer than about 10 minutes, I guarantee. Lusk, of course, contributed enormously to the success of the Easter Rising in this part of the country. And one man, Tommy Rafferty, gave his life at the Battle of Ashbourne. I will leave out the first 2 paragraphs because they deal with the countermanding order at McNeil, and I start where the mustered at Knocksedan. Thomas Ashe, Commandant under James Connolly, the 5th Battalion mobilised at 10 o'clock Easter Monday at Knocksedan. For anybody not from this area, Knocksedan is just about 2 miles to the west of Swords. It's mentioned in one of Sean O'Casey's plays, somebody going to gather butterflies at Knocksedan. Whether that was a reference to the mustering of the men, I don't know. All the acts and thoughts of Ashe's life since boyhood were an almost unconscious preparation towards this day. Only afterwards did his colleagues in Carduff National School, petite, pretty Mary monks, I'm repeating what Val said now, realised the full meaning of what he said and did on the last day at school. She recalls the occasion in a letter. After discussing the possibility of a fight for freedom, he remarked, "Should the fight begin on Good Friday, we will surely win, for we will have Brian Boru with us." He then cut all the flowers in bloom in the school garden, placed them in my arms with a request that she should be put on the altar in front of the Blessed Sacrament. Following day, Holy Thursday, 1916. In his small army were Fingal's best and bravest sons, the McAllisters of Turvey, their cousins the Westons, and their cousins the Kellys. 4 Lawlesses shouldered their guns and marched. There were the Taylors and the Wilsons and the Doyles, who in the person of Paddy Doyle maintained the link with 1798. The Black Raven bandsmen were there. There were 19-year-old Thomas Rafferty, who could not ordinarily join in the manoeuvres as employment on the government farm at Lusk did not permit, but who promised to be there when the time came. There were Jack Crinigan and the rover John McCann, described by his comrade John McAllister as the bravest man a country ever had. Captain Richard Coleman led the Swords Company. There were men from Skerries and St. Margaret's. 30 turned up at Knocksedan, but many more joined during the day, until by evening there were between 60 and 70 men under Ashe's command. Their weapons were oddly assorted. They had 12 or 15 modern service rifles, a dozen Martini single-shot rifles, some Holt Mausers, 20 or 30 shotguns and some revolvers. Their ammunition supply was less than plentiful. They all had bicycles, useful for mobility in the flat countryside where they operated. Ashe had his motorcycle, Dr. Hayes's car. A bread van was commandeered later in Swords. Thomas Ashe was to disrupt and destroy enemy communications in North County Dublin. His first step was to make the important Great Northern Railway between Dublin and Belfast impassable by blowing it up at Rogerstown Bridge. That night he camped at Finglas, moving rapidly from point to point across North County Dublin. Ashe struck now here, now there, setting a guerrilla pattern which was followed with great success in the War of Independence. He now had a force of about 45 men, divided into 4 sections, 3 to pursue warlike operations, the 4th to take charge of camp and provisions, the latter duty to rotate between the sections. In swift, decisive moves, he disarmed Swords and, following resistance, Donabate Barracks, and added their arms to his supplies. Garristown Barracks was empty of rifles as they had been sent away. At all places he dismantled telephones and other communications. Food was commandeered as necessary. A lamb from Craigie's farm at Finglas supplied a meal which the men declared was the best they ever tasted. Messages came through from the GPO. Molly Adrian of Old Town, acting as courier, a heroine ranking with the bravest. There will be glorious days for Ireland yet, wrote Connolly to Ashe. And Ashe rejoiced in the inspiration of that message in hours of crisis, trial or victory. He recalled it at Ard Fair when he commemorated casement. Within Dublin City, the Republican forces were standing up to heavy pressure from the enemy, and the battle was moving to a climax. Thomas Ashe's military operation that week was acknowledged by his commanding officer in a celebrated document. It is an order of the day from headquarters, Army of the Irish Republic, Dublin Command, dated the 28th of April, and in part reads, to soldiers. This is the 5th day of the establishment of the Irish Republic. The men of North County Dublin are in the field, have occupied all the police barracks, destroyed all the telegraph system in the Great Northern Railway up to Dundalk, and are operating against the trains of the Midland Great Western. Never had man or woman a grander cause, never was a cause more grandly served. James Connolly, Commander-General, Dublin Division. On the following morning of that day, order was issued, Friday the 28th of April. Ashe and his men were encamped at Barronstown. For the day's campaign, he proposed to capture Ashbourne Barracks, cut the Midland Great Western Railway at Batterstown so as to hold up troops expected from Athlone, and, should circumstances permit, capture another barracks to complete the day. About 9:15 p.m. he detailed 2 sections of the battalion for a special job and led them cycling in file towards Dublin and to the Slane Road, which passes through the village of Ashbourne. Near Rock Cross he halted them for instructions. Pointing out a large 2-storey building which fronted the main road 200 yards away towards Ashbourne, he told them this was Ashbourne RIC Barracks, which it was their task to capture and disarm. He sent half the troops to take up positions to the rear of the barracks and there await the signal for attack, which he would give presently. With the rest of the men, Ashe worked his way towards the front of the barracks, surprising on the way a sergeant and 2 constables, one of whom escaped. He made prisoners of the other 2, but the sergeant, who offered to take a request to the garrison advising surrender and was given a white flag for the purpose, skipped through a gap in the hedge and got away. Ashe located his men in positions facing the barracks and then, standing on a fence in full view of the building, called on the garrison to surrender. The indifference to personal danger such as displayed on this occasion gave his men confidence in battle. A volley of fire greeted his call and he took cover. The garrison had been reinforced, the windows were protected with steel shutters loopholed for defensive firing, and barriers had been put up in front of the building. The garrison was clearly confident that it could hold out. Ashe gave the signal for attack, and the Fingal men raked the building with fire in an attack that lasted half an hour. Part of the volunteers' equipment consisted of homemade hand grenades, and 2 of these, thrown at the barracks with perfect time, exploded with a deafening noise and shook the building to the roof. A white flag tied to a rifle barrel was pushed through an upper window. the defenders were surrendering. Ashe was on his way into the yard when a sudden and unforeseen development changed position completely. A short distance to the northwest of the barracks and visible from it on the road to Slane was Rath Cross. As Ashe was entering the yard to take the surrender, he heard the hoot of motor horns and looking up the road to Slane saw several motor cars, all loaded with RIC, coming towards the crossroads. There were some 20 cars containing about 80 police, although estimates vary more or less. Their arrival was completely unexpected and placed Ashe and his men in a difficult and vulnerable position. He reacted quickly. The volunteers rushed up the road towards the cross. Some got into ditches at either side, while others got up on the bank, and all opened a brisk fire on the approaching cars. Now began the real battle. The result of Ashe's move was the police convoy was halted before reaching Rath Cross and was contained in that particular road for the whole of the ensuing action, while the volunteers, though outnumbered, kept closing their grip on them. The police got out of the cars and took cover in the ditches along the road. The section that stopped the police from coming through played a decisive part in the battle. They were section leader Charles Weston, Michael and John McAllister, Benny McAllister, Richard Ainger, Nick Fleming and Paddy Doyle. They were the men who stopped the convoy coming in on top of them. The first car was only 15 yards away. Mick McAllister was the best shot of all. He played an important part in the battle. Tommy McArdle confirmed Mick McAllister's prowess. The volunteers holding cross kept up a continuous fire on the police position for half an hour, and those who had been attacking the barracks came up to the police left flank and opened fire on them. Meanwhile, Ashe sent a messenger to the camp ordering the rest of the men to come with all spare ammunition and join the attack. Step by step, the volunteers closed their grip. During one of their positional changes, Tommy Rafferty of Lusk was killed. He was wearing a bright coloured bandolier which might have attracted the enemy fire. His body was taken to a cottage nearby. The behaviour of the volunteers under fire was cool and ordered, their leader setting example. By rapid systematic fire and skillful use of terrain to conceal their true numbers, they created impression amongst their opponents that a much superior force was attacking. In fact, the police outnumbered them by 2 to 1, if not more. For 5 hours the battle went on. Captured police carbines with loads of ammunition were used by Jerry Golden, Mick Fleming and Dick Ainger and Jack Devine. Ashe's plan of containing the enemy forces in the segment of road on the Slane side of Rath Cross and closing in on them was successful, although the surrounding part had to retreat twice. At 4 p.m, the order to charge could be heard at the cross, and 300 yards away, Mulcahy could be seen with about 7 men charge the police with fixed bayonets. That was General Mulcahy. When the police saw them, those who were able to run threw their arms on the ground and rushed into a cottage 50 yards from the crossroads. Heavy fire was opened on the police trying to get into the cottage, and after about 10 minutes, a shout of surrender was heard and they marched out on the road. The commandant ordered firing to cease. The police were astonished to find their attack was so useful and so few. At the same time, the barracks garrison came down the road bearing a flag of surrender. The police lost 11 men killed, including District Inspector Harry Smith and County Inspector Gray. Over 90 rifles and a large supply of ammunition fell into Ashe's hands, besides a number of motor cars. After the battle, Dr. Hayes attended the wounded and Molly Adrian helped with bandages. 2 volunteers were killed, Tommy Rafferty and John Crenigan. The latter towards the end of the battle. He was from the Rolestown area near Swords. And about 5 men were wounded. It has been said by some survivors that the battalion was really on its way towards the Hill of Tower to emulate the gallant last stand so well remembered by the families of Fingal of the Leinster and Wexford insurgents on that hill in 1798. Thank you very much. Panel here which describes exactly the manoeuvres, but it takes a bit of studying before you can understand exactly what happened. Thank you.
Well done, Paddy Weston. It's nice to find out. We've all heard of the Battle of Ashbourne.
Hanna Lori to well, agus Mincha Luska, agus Gahara and Wincha Ashe, to Gefáilte of Cork with the Anarchy an Ocad Specialta Shot in the North Thomas Ashe, then in the pre-Bonahori than Common Shohi Lusk. Son wheel common trick-tach is more than our dome vet on Shohiv, but them the weakest of wall, the Lusk Heritage Society as up to Hayher and Ocad Shot at Ebrew. Senator O'Toole, ladies and gentlemen, and particularly the members of the Ashe family, it's a great occasion here today in Lusk, and I'd like to thank the Lusk Heritage Society for putting so much work into getting this thing up and running. It is my hope that this newly planted tree will flourish, and that so also will the spirit of Thomas Ashe. Thank you very much.
Now, I also want to say thanks in advance, I might add, to the ladies who have prepared tea for us, which we'll partake of now shortly, and also to 3 gentlemen who made the whole proceedings very easy and smoothed the path. They are, of course, Tom Kilmurray, John Flynn, and
the death of a very unusual man, a death so tragic and a man so remarkable that, as we know, his coffin was followed by 100,000 people. No words of mine are needed to stress the importance of this inquest or of your verdict. Throughout, the prison authorities have not uttered one word of regret for the conduct of those who brought Thomas Ashe to his death. In fact, their attitude could best be summed up by a phrase which Mr. Hannah used when he said, if he felt the cold, he had only himself to blame. What was the prison authorities' case? They say that the deceased was the architect of his own misfortune, that he was treated with absolute legality in the prison, and that everything flowed from his own misconduct, from his own lawlessness, and from his own breach of the prison rules. That case, which my learned friend Mr. Hannah has presented here, is, I say without apology, as false as hell itself. That case has been deliberately and disgracefully concocted by the prison board to escape guilt of willful murder which lies at their door. What really happened in this prison? Thomas Ashe started his sentence on September the 11th. Immediately, he refused to work or to obey prison rules. On September the 17th, 6 days later, the charge of refusing to work was put to him, which he did not deny. He was punished by being deprived of books and losing remission on his sentence. From then until the day he died, no other punishment, according to the Deputy Governor, was ever inflicted on him. Yet the Lord Mayor of Dublin has told us that he found Mr. Ashe in a naked cell, having laid there for 2 days and 2 nights without bed, bedding or boots, and racked from want of sleep. Do you know, gentlemen, what Thomas Ashe said to the Lord Mayor? I'll tell you, he said, I don't know what I have done to deserve this treatment. Ashe had been found guilty of an offence, and he was being punished for that offence. But this punishment was in addition to that. This was illegal and this was unrecorded. They had been caught in the act. Whoever was responsible had to make up an excuse, and then they put the cart before the horse. They invented the story of the smashing of the glass in the prison cells and the furniture and a pandemonium. Then of the Deputy Governor driven to interference, and after all that the prisoners had committed illegalities and commenced a hunger strike, as was stated, without provocation. At that stage there was no thought of a hunger strike. Yes, it's true, the prisoners planned a hunger strike for October the 1st if their demands for a different status had not been met. But this was September the 20th. This was 11 days earlier, when the cells were actually stripped. It was this order from the prison board which sparked off the hunger strike there and then. That order from Max Green, chairman of the prison board, is what brought Thomas Ashe to his death. Mr. Boland may have carried out his instructions, but Mr. Green gave the order. He broke the law, and if it were not for the intervention of the Lord Mayor, we could have had 40 corpses in Mountjoy prison instead of 1. Green's strategy was simple: not to concede the demands of the prisoners, but instead to gamble his cruelties against their courage. Mr. Max Green thought that he could break Ashe's spirit, but he only succeeded in breaking his heart. I strongly object to the attitude which the prison authorities have adopted to this whole inquest. The jury are entitled to the fullest information in this case, not partial information, not partisan information, and not political information. At the beginning of this inquest, the only people who knew all the facts surrounding the death of Thomas Ashe were the prison authorities and officials. We would have expected honesty or some sign of regret from them for this tragic affair. So what did we get? As soon as they thought that we were getting uncomfortably close to the truth, they threw their shield of privilege around themselves. And it came down like an iron shutter on what was going on in Mountjoy prison and in Dublin Castle. What is this privilege? The privilege to conceal responsibility, the privilege to hide the guilty? I would submit that the invention of the doctrine of privilege in matters of life and death, such as these, cannot and should not exist. At this stage, despite all the authorities' efforts, nobody can be in any doubt as to the degrading treatment Mr. Ashe was subjected to before and during his hunger strike. I see no point in going into the terrible details again. What have they achieved in Dublin Castle? Nothing, absolutely nothing. The prisoners' original demands are now conceded in full, and Thomas Ashe is dead. Other nations will read about it in times to come. They will be heartened by the story of this humble, uncomplaining schoolmaster who stood up to tyranny. But it is for you, the jury, here and now, to appraise the blame as to how this man met his untimely end. It is for you to so frame your verdict that people may know that this man was no suicide. Thomas Ashe loved life, and that life was brutally taken from him. If you find in accordance with these facts, then his death will not have been a complete waste. Others have tried to avoid their responsibility. I trust that you will not avoid yours. I leave that in your hands, gentlemen.
So this is Hannah's summary. At the outset, I must object to Mr. Healy's conduct throughout this inquest. All during the case, he's used extremely violent and unnecessarily abusive language. He has shown complete recklessness in the statements he has made and has disregarded every canon of decency on his examination and cross-examination of witnesses. He has done this not for the purpose of furthering any legitimate argument in the case, but rather to spread foul, unforgivable slanders. His conduct has been unparalleled in the history of the Irish bar. The result of his attacks on Dr. Lowe and Mr. Max Green was that Dr. Lowe was practically ruined in his profession, and both he and Mr. Green are under constant police protection. I say these things with regret, but it is my duty on behalf of my clients to state them. I would ask the jury to leave out of their minds all the frenzied, wild statements which have been made and deal only with the facts of the case. I put it to you, do you believe if Mr. Ashe had taken the food offered to him from the time he went into prison, that he would be dead today? He would not. The law states that when a prisoner refuses food, the jailer is obliged to preserve his life. It is, I submit, irrelevant to the inquiry whether artificial feeding is morally right or wrong. The law is that artificial feeding was necessary, and you, the jury, should start off with this proposition in mind. There's absolutely no doubt there was a concerted effort among all the prisoners to defy the rules in Mountjoy prison. The governor was faced with what could only be called a mutiny. Mr. Healy tells us that Thomas Ashe is supposed to have said what Mr. Ashe is supposed to have said to the Lord Mayor. Do you know what his last words were to his priest? He said, "Father, we made a great fight. A great fight." The governor was up against a very resolute and determined group of men. What would have been said if he'd given in to that? If he had not been able to govern his own prison, he had to act. Mr. Ashe did not catch cold, and he did not complain of having caught cold. Much has been made of this matter of his bed and bedding while
interest to this occasion. I eventually, after some time, did go searching. My mother was a great collector of and holder of all things of interest with that time, the rising and that. And I found a letter of Thomas Ashe's written to my father, I'll give you the date now, it was written on the 5th of September, your glasses there, on the 5th of September 1917. At the time, my father had been qualified in medicine and he was looking for a possibility of appointments in various parts of the country. And he must have written to Thomas Ashe asking if there was a possibility of getting into this North County Dublin, I presume. And my father had written this to him, and from Mountjoy prison he wrote to him. Now it's 2 pages, I don't know, I have my glasses here with me. Should I read it? I'll just tell that it's here. My dear Dr. Cusack, I would have written to you long ago, but I hadn't finished my inquiries on that proposed matter before my arrest. I spoke to Dr. Hayes and he thought well of your coming to Dublin. Spoke to some members of the aid and they too wished you would come.